This is Next Radio 2016 with Broadcast Bionics, innovative solutions for creative people.
No booze. There are no booze for switching sides to TV. Anyway, great to be here. No booze that I could hear, anyway. Maybe they were at the top, I'm not sure. Thank you. I'd planned for that. But it's true, yes. After 18 years in commercial radio, very happy years, last year I moved over to Sky News as senior ed. And the reason I'm here today is because I've noticed some things over the last year that have changed my views on commercial radio news in particular, because that's my background. So many years working as a news editor, as a news reporter, as a manager of people in commercial radio. And it's just made me sort of rethink some of the rules and regulations that I always stuck to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I think there's a lot that TV can learn from radio, and particularly commercial radio. So I'll touch a little bit on that as well. But most importantly for me is looking towards mobile and a kind of mobile future. There's a lot that we're doing at Sky News about that, and I think there may be a few points that I can share for you if you're going back to your own newsrooms. Is radio v.TV a thing? Maybe from the booze it kind of is still. I don't know. When I started, it was very much about, the telly tart spending too long putting the makeup on, instead of getting out on the story. And there was similar vitriol. I don't kind of sense that these days. I think people come out into the business as journalists, and they're happy to work on any platform. But of course, there are clear differences, aren't there? But there are also crossover points. So I'm going to start politically with what TV can learn from radio. This is going to win the audience over, isn't it? We can teach them a thing or two. Targeted content. Too often, I see stories that run on TV news channels, and you think to yourself, who is watching that? Who is that aimed at? And I think in news, and particularly in commercial radio news, we know how to target. We know who we're writing for. We know who's listening to the stations, and we deliver content that's relevant for them. And I think that's something that TV could focus on. Multi-skilled. When you work as a radio reporter or radio newsreader, you kind of do it all, don't you? There isn't a huge team. Of course, it's a more collaborative effort, I think, in telly. It kind of has to be. But we're seeing the change, certainly at Sky, and I know at the BBC. Reporters are having to not just do pieces to camera and lives and standing around cutting packages, but they're writing content for websites, they're doing Facebook Lives, they're commissioning and getting out there and doing Snapchat. There's so much that's going on now for TV news reporters, but they are some way behind, I think, the multi-skilling views that we had in radio. Empowering. You get a sense of ownership in radio, I think, because you kind of own the story from the point you decide to go out and do it. And in telly, there are so many layers that can sometimes get in the way of really feeling a sense of ownership. What I think telly can learn on that is just stripping away so many of the layers that you need to go to just get out on a story, and for you to feel like you can own it from the point of commissioning right the way through to the end. This is unpopular, but I do think radio is generally quite cost-effective. I don't like to see the trimming that can so often happen to the bone, particularly in news and particularly in commercial radio. But there are ways to trim and to keep a news service going, and without making them very flabby. Telly has been very flabby and is realising now that in this marketplace it kind of can't be. So it's following radio in realising we've got to make cuts, we've got to make changes, but we still want a great product at the end of it. We still want to be able to report the news. And I think there's a lot to be learned from the attitude and approach that we've seen, particularly from commercial radio. And finally, I think there's nothing more engaging than just a great radio presenter sitting in his or her studio talking to their audience. You kind of don't get that on a news channel. It's very difficult to get that sense of personality and connection. I think we need to look at how radio does that and maybe learn a few lessons. Any of you have seen The Pledge on Sky, which was a kind of panel discussion program which doesn't have an anchor, it doesn't have a chair, it's just kind of 5 guests talking. Nobody actually takes the lead. One of those guests, quite regularly, is Nick Ferrari, a fantastic radio presenter, but he isn't the chair of it. So it's about trying to do things, and I think that's something that Sky is learning from radio, which is be engaging, make great, interesting content. What can radio learn from TV? I'm being flippant here. Of course, we need makeup and we need the lights in telly. I accept that. But how many people really think about the fact that when they're going to work in radio every day, they are going to be seen, yeah, particularly in news. If you're out as a reporter, you may be asked to do a Facebook Live for your radio station. You may find that your still is appearing somewhere. You may find TV stations like Sky are asking you to do down-the-line lives, because we do it all the time with the commercial radio network. We ask local radio reporters to do that. So it's just about maybe having a back of mind that, you know, you may well be seen as well as being heard. And certainly my days in radio, when I could rock up to read the news in whatever I wanted to wear, I wouldn't think that way anymore. The days of reading news bulletins in a Megadeth t-shirt are kind of gone, aren't they? Because you're going to be seen on a webcam or on a camera in the studio. That's not going to look particularly appropriate if you're reporting a terrible tragedy. Specialists in radio, it's difficult, isn't it, in radio newsrooms to have specialists. You might get away with a sports journalist and an entertainment journalist if you're lucky. I'm not suggesting that radio newsrooms go down the editorial route of having editorial specialists. But what about a digital specialist? Who in your newsrooms is the person when a story breaks that has that digital news gathering skill to really help tell the story? And I don't mean the person who, you know, pushes out a tweet or writes a post on Facebook, who can use the tools to actually find out what's going on in that particular area. Can they ask for some user-generated content, you know, some video or some stills which you can show on your platforms? Can they try and connect a reporter with an eyewitness at the scene? Can they set up using the digital tools that you've got for someone to come on and do a phone or a Skype or a Facebook Live, whatever it might be? Who is that specialist in your newsroom? If you don't have one, I think you need one. I've changed my mind completely. I used to tell my news team, how dare you repeat? You know, you must find a new clip all the time. This is controversial maybe, but I think repeat. If you've got great content, if you've had a fantastic interview, you know, within your breakfast show news, repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Because I think I don't find in my own view that it puts people off, but I find that if new people hear it, it's actually advantageous. And certainly we see that in telly all the time. Telly is very integrated, particularly if you work at Sky. You know, we are one big team, and I love the fact that radio has that feel of it. But on occasions, newsrooms can be sort of the dark arts, can't they? The journalists round the corner or up on the platform, away from the kind of the commercial team or the marketing team. And I'm a great fan of kind of bringing everybody together. I just think it means that your journalists are kind of part of your brand and can be great brand ambassadors. And I do think that radio stations can be news-making as well as news-breaking. Get a great story, and you've got a fantastic way to promote your radio station's journalism and the brand of your radio station. So if you get a good, you know, local radio journalist, allow them the time to go out and find a story, because local papers, regional papers, national networks may soon be knocking on your door for interviews. But it's about, really, for me, the march to mobile. Radio and telly, traditional, you know, you may or may not agree with my views on that. There's certainly no blueprint here. But just a few thoughts. Maybe we should think about reinventing formats. Telly's doing it, it has to. Radio does it all the time in the wider sense. But news bulletins, why don't we try something different? Some stations do, some stations don't. If you're still starting your news bulletins with the top stories this hour, just ask yourself, you know, is that the right thing? Could you do something a little fresher, a little more engaging? At Sky, we're trying to refresh the look of our channel and the way that we do our news and our news presenters. And it just made me think, I still hear a lot of news bulletins, particularly in the commercial sector, that sound the same. The other thing that you could do is, look at this. This is TV3 in New Zealand. They've done something which I think is very unique. Have a watch.
Mornings start and finish here. On radio, on TV, online. This is Paul Henry.
Good morning to you, New Zealand. It is April 7th, wherever you are, however you are tuning in. It is brilliant to have your company for our first show, our groundbreaking show, a world first. And of course, joining me as they always will, Hilary Barry. How are you, Hilary?
Good morning, lovely to be here.
Okay, world first, they say. I mean, you may think that looks quite familiar to something you'd see on LBC or any other kind of breakfast show, but the crucial difference here is, normally what we see is cameras put into a radio studio. What they've done is put a radio studio into a TV studio. That is a TV studio that they've built a radio format within, and it's simulcast across, you know, radio, across TV, it's streamed online. It has the feel of a radio breakfast show, and yet it's beautifully presented for telly. I rather like it, and I think potentially there's a lot that we could do with that as a format. Just rattling through quickly, people who say in music radio that you can't make news, I think you can. This was something when I was head of news at KISS we did. It was a campaign called Use It or Lose It to encourage people to vote before the general election last year. We had real success with it, and we got a lot of interest in it from media, which was simply running a campaign on Instagram. That was the format that we used, but we promoted it via radio. It wasn't a radio format, it was a social format, but radio helped to move the format along. Finally, just a couple of points I want to make. I'm calling this the mobile menopause because we're in the change. We can't reverse the clock. We're having a few hot flushes, I think it's fair to say, and it's not going to stop, is it? But a few points from me. Go with your audience. Look at the platforms that they're going on. It sounds simple, but do you really know where your audience are going in terms of social media? And lead your audience too. At Sky, we really push Snapchat as a format, and certainly I've seen the BBC pushing Yik Yak as a format too, and they're doing fantastic things with that. So follow, but also lead your audience. Add value with a dedicated service. Make sure you've really got someone, as I said earlier, who can totally get how important it is to communicate on social platforms. Have a distinct tone of voice. Stand out from the crowd. Maybe engage with your listeners who are using social media and talk to them about the news. You don't have to express an opinion, but you can accelerate debate. And I think, of course, be consistent with your brand. Whatever your brand is, you need to be talking about the stories that you would hear on the radio, but just do it in a way that's very targeted. I couldn't have a news presentation without that slide because it just wouldn't be allowed. My summary is then, think about reinventing your formats. What can go wrong? People don't like it, change it back. Develop specialists, particularly digitally. Become newsmakers, not just newsbreakers. Be responsive to the needs of your audience, go where they are, and finally, embrace the mobile menopause. You can't turn back the clock. Thank you.
This is Next Radio 2016 with Broadcast Bionics. Innovative solutions for creative people.